Welcome to today's episode of the Men's Room. I am super excited to have my friend Greg Styan here. And we were just having a very fruitful conversation yesterday about whether or not men are entering a state where they are evaluating whether they're going through a midlife crisis or a midlife change. So that begs the question. So, Greg, what better way to get into it than just to do this? So,
Absolutely.
over to
Linda,
you.
I can't wait to talk. Yeah, I feel like there's a massive change going on at the moment, not just with men, but with women as well. Well, the world seems to be a different place. COVID obviously impacted on something with the great resignation and quiet quitting, this growth of digital nomads and people working from home, and I can definitely see a transition. And it's interesting how you coin it. I think lots of people are seeing many different influences, and developments during this stage. But like in our chat yesterday, I'm going through my own transition. Leaving the UK, to go and travel the world. And the deeper I was diving into it. 200,000 people have left the UK since December. I think that 76% of midlife adults, in the work space are assessing career and life goals. There's something different here, something changing. Have you spotted anything with that on, not just on LinkedIn, but in life in general with the people that you work with?
Oh, absolutely. That's how it came up. It was a conversation just this week about, am I going through a crisis or what's going on? Because people are starting to take an inventory of how have I lived my life? What have I achieved? And what else is there? And so we really got to talking about it for quite some time. And so it's these water cooler chats that bring out a lot. And the thing that came up was there wasn't a crisis as it was an awakening of there's more that I want to do and explore. And our time is limited here, and we don't always know when that is. And so I want to go out and explore. I want to live my life knowing that I don't have any regrets. I want to, in some ways, leave a legacy, but they also want to create the living legacy. And so spending time with the people they care about, advancing in the career is important, but only to a point. And so it's
Yeah,
more about living that purposeful, meaningful life. And so I challenge them to think about it more as taking an inventory rather than this crisis, because it's not a crisis. It's just a matter of deciding what it is that you want. Maybe in some cases, dropping some things that aren't adding value to your life, and then just moving forward with it, and just like thinking of it as a positive thing, because a lot of times people think about change or going through transitions, they think about all the negative pieces to it. But if you flip it around and reframe it to all the positives that can happen as you go through a transition, life becomes so much easier. It becomes more enjoyable. And what's the best thing that can happen to you?
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting to think about that midlife crisis term. Is it a midlife transition? Is it an identity shift? I think there's many different reframes, like you said, that you can put on that. I really like the way you said about reframing and looking forward. That makes me think about neuroplasticity. It's the brain's ability to adapt and change at any age, right? So we are learning as we go out, as we go through life, and that makes me think that challenges are exciting. There's no growth without fear, if that makes sense, and they work um, together. I saw another amazing stat, and I told you before I love stats. It was 95% of people in the UK never move out of 5 miles away from where they were born. Unbelievable stat, you know. And then you link that to, I think that, 90% of 16 to 24-year-olds in the UK have less than £1,000 in their bank account. They are mirrored, they are together. So it's like without great risk, there's no room for great reward. And that brings me back, doesn't it? Is actually like we are resilient. We can, move through life. We can adapt, So I love that term of like reframing it and looking forward. But, the trends are massive, What have you seen on LinkedIn? You've seen a lot more coaches coming in or a lot more people trying to transition from like working in the work, working in the office to try and work, remotely online for themselves. So I've seen a few things for that. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the landscape is certainly changing. We're in a time of great change. And, COVID, as you mentioned earlier, was that circumstance that a lot of us had to figure out how to navigate. And now that we've moved through or transitioned through that state, it's like, well, what parts of COVID were the parts that we want to keep, and which parts are the parts that we want to put it to the side? And I think that's what people are doing. They're trying to figure out, do I want to stay and be working online? Do I want to travel the world and find an employer that will honor that need to want to explore? And so I think that the conversation is that no matter where we are, we're going to go through these transitions, and why not have it be on our terms? And so I think that this movement to wanting to travel, to be a digital nomad, to um, really like defining who and what we want to devote and spend our time with, right? And so I think there's a movement away from um, being loyal to the employer. Yes, we want to, in some cases, when we have an employer such as myself, to have loyalty, but at the same time, we also want to honor our needs and what we desire in our life. And so the job that we do is going to become secondary. And because it's really fascinating when you look at the generational differences
Yeah,
over all of the years, and what each generation learned from the one before it. And so now I think that there's a lot of thought on all the different generations that are in existence about what is the life that we want to have, what's important to us, what's not so important to us. And so we're redefining that happens.
absolutely, absolutely. I love that, and I resonate with a lot that was said there. I think that people are starting to see flexibility is more important than salary, even if that's at the cost of, taking a job promotion or driving a flashier car or having like the best watch on your wrist or whatever it might be. I think in the past, that's what people wanted, the idea of keeping up with the Joneses, that social comparison theory where they wanted to be better than their neighbors or their siblings or whatever it might be. I also think we're moving out of that a little bit where people want to, I talk about this identity shift, that life satisfaction. People want more out of life. One of the golden rules as a coach is you shouldn't talk too much about yourself. Especially when it comes to advertising and whatever it might be. You need to cure people's problems, have ways to cure it. But I had a moment. This plant was seeded in my mind 10 years ago. It wasn't just like a year ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago. It was 10 years ago. And I was coach myself when I hit rock bottom. And the coach said to me, he helped me map out my life. And he said, Greg, I want you to look at your life as a movie. And I want you to look at it in 1 year's time, 3 years' time, 5 years' time, and 10 years' time. Because I don't want you to go any further than that. And I want you to imagine that you're not just, the main character, but you're the director of it as well. You know, and all the way through it, I was mapping it out. 1 year, three, where I was going to live, what my life would be like if I had family, etc., etc. And he said to me, Greg, do you want to be remembered is, a good guy or a villain? Do you want to be sort of, looked at as Greg, the, alcoholic who works too much, who, prioritizes money over his family, or do you want to be remembered as Greg, the husband who has children, etc., etc.? That is a change that I've seen. I talked about this idea of that keeping up with the Joneses, where people were so desperate for objects, flashy object syndrome. In the UK, we know that as a blackbird loves flashy objects. Are people starting to reframe that? Are they looking for more life satisfaction, self-actualization type stuff? Are they looking for more out of life? And was the seed of that COVID? Was that, like I said, people could see a different life, that it wasn't just about work, that they could work remotely, they could travel, they could be more human, spend more time with their kids. Um, is that the same sort of thing that you've seen with your, the people that you work with, or is there a different sort of, a different angle to that?
I think it's all of those things. In reality, people, like you had said, are going inward and focusing on their self, and they're doing it in a way that isn't necessarily those materialistic ways, the way that society defines success. They're redefining success is, are my relationships to myself and the people around me meaningful? Am I that person that when I'm outside the room and people might speak of, are they, do I like what people have to say about me? Now, that doesn't mean that you're looking for that validation of what they're saying. I'm getting a little deeper here. It's like, am I happy with who I am in a way that people observe me? Because how people observe you and how you internally feel can be different. And so it's all about, am I satisfied? Am I happy? Am I doing the things that I want to be doing for myself? The outside views are maybe a reflection back, but I love the illustration that you had of viewing your life as a movie that the coach took you through, because that's really it.
Mm.
You can be a player in all the roles. You can be the villain, or you can, be the hero. You can be the director, or you can be in the starring role. And so in life is very much like that. You can shift your identity as you evolve and grow, but you only do that as you gain that awareness. And the only way you're going to get awareness of who you are and what you want is to take that inventory and sit down and really think about, who am I and what do I want? And am I doing the things to get me closer or further away from that ideal?
Yeah,
Today's topic of change, one of the things that you have to ask yourself is, do I really want to go through that change? So you identify something and you're like, do I want that? And because I hear all the time with people that I work with that they want this change, and the things that they say are in contradictory to wanting that to change and taking the action. And so I'm like, well, why are they not, they say they want this, but why aren't they doing that? And so I think a lot of it has to do, they want to hold on to their old identity, but yet they really crave and want this new one. And so, you know, the desire doesn't get it done, right? It's you got to have that support and structure of people in your life that'll support you in doing that. But ultimately, you're that director of that movie. And so the only way it's going to happen is if you uh, accept that I'm going through this change. I want this change. And what am I willing to, to give up to get there? Or what am I willing to go out and learn about that will drive me, forward? Depending on what type of change it is, of course.
absolutely. Yeah, and that's a common theme, isn't it? Is that people have, in the UK we call them pipe dreams, if that makes sense, where they have these great aspirations and never quite follow them through. With every client that I work with, or everyone I interact with, I get them to create a roadmap, loosely based on being that, that actor in their life movie, if you like. And that's why coaching's so great, isn't it? Is accountability. When there's that, that feeling that you're going to step off the path, or, or it gets tough, or it's looking uphill. That's why accountability is so important, is it? Is to keep people on the tracks in situations like that. Another spin that I want to think about when it comes to creating that roadmap. This is going to sound a little crazy. 10 years ago, when I had that moment and I was rock bottom, and the guy helped me and we mapped out my life over 10 years, I visualized it. You have mantras, you go over it over and over and over again. You work towards how you're going to get to each step, whether it's financially, physically, romantically, spiritually, whatever it might be. You have a guy who keeps you accountable. There was something priceless in that visualization process as well, where I wanted it so badly. Um, Weirdly, even where I've gone into, like, semi-spiritual realms, and like I won't go into a deep dive into that. And that rung true alongside, if that makes sense. So it's like, if you want it that badly, if you picture it, if you visualize it, you can go for it. Like I wanted this change. I needed it, not just for me and my wife, but for my future, if that makes sense. It wasn't just, I thought 6 months ago. It's been 10 years in the making to get me to this point, if that makes sense. And that's what I try and explain to others as well, is you need to plan this out. You need to map it. Once you've got that and you understand where you want to be, and you create that plan, you can put all those little, you can put that vehicle in place, can't you, to get you there, you know? Um, and that brings me on to, this point about, why are so many people changing? Why is there such a shift? Is it because it's easier abroad? Is it because it's easier to work remotely, or something else? The press love to, especially in the UK, love to paint this out as a really dark time, that we got political problems, we got, upheaval, this, that, and in whatever's going all around the world, right? We talked about this. We said we weren't going to dive into this. Actually, is it all doom and gloom? Have people become a lot more self-aware? Are there much better support systems such as coaching, great role models and stuff on LinkedIn and YouTube, whatever it might be, passing on these influences? I think that's a good topic of um, discussion. Whilst we talk about all the negativity in the world, actually there's other influences behind this. Is that positive? I think it is, if that makes sense. I've had role models that I've looked up to that have seen what are doing similar stuff to me, and that pushed me on, if that makes sense. Do you agree like that? Do you agree with that? Is there anyone that you think is a great role model anywhere that you're sort of pushing towards yourself?
That's a lot of really good question there to unpack. And so the first one you asked is whether or not I feel that there's that doom and gloom that's going on that people are wanting to move away from. And I think it's more about people understanding themselves more. Because when you're faced with a doom and gloom or other things going on, you don't want to hang out there. So you want to be resilient, and being resilient means having that hope and positivity that I have choices that can shift my trajectory, and then believing that you can do that. And so I think that there's a lot of people that are thirsty for, how do I live resiliently? How do I move in a world where sometimes it can be dark, it can be hurtful, it can be all those things. However, the human life is, we're meant to experience all these things. And so I'm a real big believer is you can't really live in a world that's all positive and happy and um you and moving forward in a way that everyone's collaborative. I mean, that's what you want, ideally. However, it's during those tougher times that you get to find out who you are and what you're made of and what you can do. And then right now it's just giving people are giving themselves permission to want something different than what that maybe their parents experienced, or even what they experienced earlier on. And so they're like, I want XYZ. And so I'm going to go through this change and do that. And they're knowing that a lot of times, and you said this, is that coaches, therapists, guides, all these different individuals, well, they're outside people, because the hardest part about going through change is being in the middle of it. And so it's hard for you to see where you're at and where you're going at any one time. And so having somebody outside of yourself to do that. Now, here's a golden nugget that I wanted to share today. Because I value coaching so much, I've had mentors, coaches, guides all throughout my life, and so I value them. Well, I had a colleague, a friend of mine, take me through an exercise that was so powerful, and I had forgotten about it. And so we are very much knowledgeable about how role plays give people an opportunity to have a crucial conversation, how to maybe plan, how to take an action to get a different result. And so it was really interesting to me how big a shift happened the moment I wasn't playing myself. I was playing another person. And so it opened up perspectives that I hadn't thought of. It opened up expansion to getting curious. It opened up a thought pattern to trying something differently at a low bar of entry. And I thought, wow, this is great. And so really, one of the things about change is that we want to hold on to our old identities. We don't necessarily want to get uncomfortable and hear the truth. And so if we can find ways in ourselves with the support of others to do this work, then we're going to be able to be in a place where it doesn't matter where we are. Because that's one thing that COVID taught us, whether we're in the office or we choose to be out remote, the work can get done if we're open up to the imagination of what can be. So I think that what people learned was that you can open up possibility and it doesn't matter where you are. So that was what COVID taught us. And I think that's where we are. We're just taking that learning and applying it to where we are now to, say yes to us, say yes to what we want, go out there and do it, and then find support to have it happen. I think that's really why we're in this massive shifted change. And the digital nomads or working remotely, that's just one example. There's also people that are doing this other thing that I think is wonderful, which is they're doing more and more things in person. So even if they're abroad or traveling around, they're still cultivating the relationships in person, and they're reaching out and doing more and more of that. So it's like we've taken the best and the worst of the experience of COVID and applying it to build a new model of what success looks like in business and career, what success looks like for us personally. And so I think it's a time that's actually very exciting.
I agree with that. Yeah, and that's really important. I agree with that. Actually, it is exciting. I think lots of people love to put a negative spin on this, and lots of people are influenced by what they see in the press, what they see, on their Instagram scroll, whatever it might be, and most of it is doom and gloom. But actually, I'm not so sure it is. I think actually, when you look at it, support networks are changing. People are becoming a lot more open. Um, and I'm interested to see what the future looks like, if that makes sense. What's it going to look like in another 5, 10 years' time? Is this developmental journey going to go even further? I think it will, if that makes sense. I think there's going to be a lot of change, especially with, education to support groups, whatever it might be. But it's interesting, like, was there a moment where you were super influenced? Was there someone that sparked that light bulb in your brain? Who was it that was like, made you think, right, Linda, I want to be a coach? What was that moment
Oh,
for you?
yes. I've had a couple of different mentors do that, but I want to go back to the very first coach I ever had. And I had access to him in an organization. And so really I learned about my more about myself and what I wanted and what I could go after. And it set the trajectory. And so there was a course that was offered in the workplace called What's Your Spark? And that was the defining moment there, because as someone that's a professional in finance, there's more that I wanted to do as a person. And one of the things that I like about the jobs that I've held is that I get to serve and help people. And so I like the people part of a lot of different disciplines outside of accounting. And yes, by going through this program and finding out what it is that brought me alive when I do it and I want to do more of it, I actually went out of the zone of being uncomfortable. And it took me about a year. It took me about a year. I wanted to do coaching. I wanted to facilitate small group discussion. I wanted to create programs, all of these things. And I didn't go to school to do that. I didn't. I went to school, got my degree in accounting. And so I thought, well, how can I do this? And they said simply, the way you do this is you go and you introduce yourself and what you'd like to bring in an unpaid capacity to your audience. And I thought, well, I'm not ready yet. I don't have all these credentials. And so the funny thing is that it was my passion and my delivery of what I wanted to share with the world. And I wasn't looking to get any payment from it. But I was told before I even left the meeting, I love what you want to bring to this space. And I want you to fill out information to create a contract and get paid. And by the way, I need your course long description and or long description and short description so we can put it out for students. And I thought, oh my gosh, if I had not gone to that offering in that organization, if I had not had those one-on-one coaching conversations, I don't know that I would have done that. I don't know that I would have done that. So, just by having that space for what could be and giving me the hope that I could go out and explore and find out what is, it's taken me on this trajectory that I would have never planned for myself, including being the podcast of the Men's Room Show. And one of my mentors actually said, you do a podcast, you'll put your coaching, your teaching, your workshops, all of that out there, and people can see what it is that you bring to the equation. And that is how you can grow as a coach and an individual. Again, a mentor. So I've had a couple really important pivotal people in my life, and there's continues to be more because I network all the time. It's not like an end goal for me. I continually network, meet people I need to know, and then I connect other people who need to know each other. So that's how I expand.
That's an amazing story. And it's linked really well into this subject of change. You know, like if you hadn't have had that light bulb moment, if you hadn't have put yourself in there for that meeting, you know, then you wouldn't be in a position that you are now. That's a lovely story. I had something a little bit different. I think when I was younger, I was always really interested in football managers, you know, soccer to you, and how like influential they are on a team. And I had you know, I was able to manage my own team for 5 years, and I absolutely loved it. I never. This is going to sound so cliche. I always remember when I was younger and I saw Tony Robbins for the first time, you know, maybe like 13 or 14. And I was like, wow, this guy is something. He's a star seed of some kind, isn't he? You know, he's just got this magnetism. And then I didn't think too much of it. I was like, wow, he's incredible. You know, he's got a real talent for talking and, you know, relates to people. I met him very briefly. Once I met him, I was in the same room as him for, let's say, even like 5 to 6 minutes in Palm Beach in Florida. I was like, oh my God, this guy is so powerful. I mean, he's just, people just magnetized by him and the way he talks and how positive he is. He's like that all the time. I realized that actually that's what he is, you know, 24/7. That was a big moment for me. I was like, he's genuinely interested in helping people. And that brings me on to another bit. One of the things that really spurred me on into coaching is when I was working in the city and and I was in, you know, West London and I was, you know, all these places that I worked in LA, whatever. There are so many charlatans in coaching, so many people that are just interested in coaching for the money or for quick, you know, a quick fix or whatever it might be. You can't lead others down a path if you haven't walked it yourself. And I think that was part of my inspiration. It's almost like I generally wanted to help people. I didn't want people to get caught up so much in this, you know, in the charlatans, in the false prophets. Um, and that's one of my mottos in the way that I lead this. I don't work with everyone. If someone comes to me and they've got a problem, I have to really reflect on whether I can help them or not. And I only ever go with someone if I know I'm going to get a 5-star review. And that's not about money. That's me actually thinking, can I help this person? Can I help them get from A to B, regardless of the money or whatever it might be? I don't think everyone does that. And that's a negative spin on coaching. But part of me, in the way why I do this, and I do so much for free as well, like these chats or whatever, is you've got to want to help people. And that's and that's really linked to this change as well, isn't it? You know, this motivates me. You're not going to be able to make that change unless you can find something that motivates you, whether it's a hobby, you know, it could be art, whatever it might be. But if you don't have that driving force to inspire you to take your, you know, to take you forward, as you've said so many times, then that, you know, that spark is going to be difficult to create. But it's interesting to think, you know, why we're both sat here. We've had influences, we've had that spark, you know, we've wanted change, done something about it. And I hope more than anything that rubs off on a few people, you know, these people that are struggling with work-life balance or are thinking, oh, should I or shouldn't I make that digital nomad change, you know, whatever. Life is short. You get one chance at this. You don't want to look back retrospectively, do you? You know, your future self doesn't want to look back and think, oh, do you know what? I should have went to Bali. I should have done this. I should have done that. That was all part of my roadmap creating when that coach was starting that thing with me. And that's what I do with others as well. You know, it's an interesting thing. You know, you don't want your future self to look back and regret it. Yeah, and it's also nicely linked to this subject that we're talking about, change, isn't it? You know, and like I said, you know, it's I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I think there's a lot of positivity to take here. You know, and hopefully our talk today will ring true with a few people and they will maybe make that jump, maybe start that podcast, write that book, you know, do that, make that piece of art, whatever it might be. And that's why we're here, isn't it? You know, that's why we're here. So like I said, you know, Linda, thank you so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed it. You know, we've become great friends, haven't we, over the past year? And I'd love to do this again with you sometime, you know, and we can talk, you know, maybe come back to it in 6 months' time and talk about, you know, was the change positive? Am I sitting there in 6 months' time, you know? just before I'd start, I'd say just before I go, interestingly, I'm taking my wife out for dinner. Linda was so lovely tonight and helping me change the time back because I promised my wife a lovely dinner. Um, and then I was explaining to Linda why I'm taking out for dinner. It's all part of my Eisenhower matrix where I time block and I put my wife first, even above my clients and whatever. Happy wife, happy life. Um, and she took some convincing for us to go and do this digital nomad lifestyle, but I'm glad I did. And again, brings me back. You said something about resilience, about, life's not all perfect. There's hard things to deal with, but I think we're all capable of getting over those bumps in the road, aren't we? You know. Um, but Linda, an absolute pleasure to speak to you. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
I appreciate and accept the invitation to come back in 6 months and evaluate. And well, there's one more before we go, is I would like people to have that tool of that roadmap that you take people through, because a lot of times it's the how do I go about it. So can we share uh, maybe an outline or a way to people that could get in touch with you to get that roadmap that they can follow, put in, possibly work with you, work with me to really define what that is, because taking the inventory, putting it into roadmap, and then coming back 30, 60, 90, 6 months later and seeing where they are in that journey. I would love us for us to do that.
Absolutely. The best place to find me in terms of my theories or how I talk or how I think, and also some great minds is the Masculinity Unmasked podcast, which we were so grateful to have you on. And there's some amazing people who talk about their life stories and give away some real gems. But I'm also a big believer in the coach trap at the moment, the idea of helping, whether it might be starting their own digital nomad dream. So if anyone wants to find me, the best place is www.thecoachtrap.co.uk. But obviously, I'm on LinkedIn, is Greg Styan. I'm on everything because obviously I want to spread the word. I want to try and get out those. I want to influence as many people as possible. Hopefully, to take that jump. Where maybe they're nervous or they don't want to do it. Think, you know what? I've only got one chance at this. I'm gonna do it.
And with that, I'm going to leave you to take your wife on that wonderful dinner. Say hello for me, and we will talk to each other once again here on the men's room. Thank you.